They laughed when a broken veteran bought a $5 farm. But the moment his dog started digging, everything changed. No one in town believed Caleb Hayes had anything left. He had an aging pickup truck, a collapsing farm, and a past that refused to let him sleep. That was all he carried with him into the mountains. But his German shepherd, Ranger, kept watching the land, waiting, as though the dog knew something Caleb didn't. And when the ground finally opened beneath their feet, it wasn't just dirt they uncovered. It was a secret buried for decades. A secret that could change everything, or destroy it. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The first thing people noticed about the property was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over a valley at dusk, but a heavy, hollow silence, as though the land itself had grown tired of asking to be remembered. Wind whispered through broken fences, carrying dust instead of the scent of crops or livestock. The farmhouse stood in the middle of it all, leaning slightly to one side like an old man too exhausted to straighten his back. Most of the paint had peeled away years ago, exposing gray, splintered boards weathered by countless Wyoming winters. The porch sagged badly in the center. One front window was cracked, its glass webbed with fractures. The barn looked even worse. Part of its roof had collapsed. What had once been red paint had faded into a weary brown, and rust clung to every hinge, nail, and abandoned piece of machinery scattered across the yard. That was the place Caleb Hayes chose to buy. For $5. Word traveled quickly through the little Wyoming town. News always did. By the time Caleb's old pickup rattled down the narrow dirt road toward the farm, several locals had already gathered near the gate, leaning against their vehicles as though waiting to witness something halfway between a tragedy and a joke. $5, one man muttered, shaking his head. He actually paid $5 for that? Another man laughed. Should have been free. Even then, I wouldn't take it. Caleb didn't answer. He brought the truck to a slow stop beside the crooked wooden gate. The engine coughed once, shuddered, then went quiet. For a moment, Caleb simply sat behind the wheel. His hands rested on it loosely, while his eyes studied the land ahead. Then the passenger door opened. A large German shepherd jumped down and landed lightly on the dry earth. His name was Ranger. Dark sable fur covered most of his body, streaked with warm gold that caught what little sunlight managed to break through the clouds. His ears stood upright as he surveyed the unfamiliar property. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply watched. A few seconds later, Caleb stepped from the truck. At 68, he still carried the broad frame and controlled movements of a man who had once pushed his body far beyond ordinary limits. Age had slowed him, but it hadn't made him weak. There was simply more care in every movement now, a stiffness earned through years that hadn't been gentle. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. There was something distant in his gaze, too. Something that never completely came home. He wore a faded flannel shirt beneath a heavy jacket, worn jeans, and boots that had crossed more ground than most people ever would. Caleb ignored the men watching from the road. Instead, he looked at the farm. Ranger moved beside him and brushed lightly against his leg. Caleb rested one hand on the dog's head. It wasn't a command. It wasn't reassurance. It was simply familiar, the kind of touch between two companions who had long ago stopped needing words. One of the men near the fence raised his voice. "You really bought that place, old man?" Caleb kept looking at the house. "Sure did." A few chuckles followed. "You know the roof leaks, right? The barn's about ready to fall over. And the well's dry," another man added. "Been dry for years." Caleb nodded as though they were confirming details he already knew. "Appreciate the warning." The nearest man crossed his arms. "You planning on fixing all that?" Caleb finally looked over his shoulder. There was nothing angry in his expression, nothing defensive, just a calm, level stare. "I didn't come here for perfect." That seemed to confuse them more than an argument would have. Caleb turned away, unlatched the gate, and pushed it open. The old wood groaned in protest. Ranger crossed the property line first, his nose lowered toward the ground, sorting through scents buried beneath dust, weeds, and years of neglect. Caleb followed. Each footstep sent up a small cloud of dirt. The grass was brittle and yellow, and almost nothing about the land appeared alive. Halfway between the gate and the farmhouse, Caleb stopped. Behind him, the townspeople's voices faded. The wind shifted through the tall pines bordering the property. Their dark trunks stood like silent sentries around the dying farm. Caleb drew a long breath. The air smelled faintly of pine and distant rain. For one brief moment, he closed his eyes, and the noise inside his head softened. It didn't disappear. It never disappeared, but it became quieter. Ranger returned to his side and sat without being told. The dog's attention remained fixed on the far side of the property. Caleb opened his eyes. "This'll do." Back near the road, someone scoffed. "He's lost it." "Give him a month," another man said. "He'll be gone." Maybe Caleb heard them. Maybe he didn't. Either way, he picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the farmhouse. The porch groaned beneath his boots. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from the road. Some boards had gone soft with rot, and others seemed one hard winter away from becoming firewood. Caleb pushed open the front door. It resisted, then broke loose with a sharp crack. Dust swirled through the dim interior. The house smelled of old timber, damp earth, and years without people. Ranger entered behind him, then stopped. The dog's ears twitched. His body tightened. Slowly, Ranger turned his head toward the far side of the house and beyond it, toward the old barn. It was as though he had heard something Caleb couldn't. Caleb didn't notice. Not yet. He put down his bag and surveyed the room. Broken boards, cracked plaster, dust, neglect. Most people would have seen ruin. Caleb saw somewhere no one expected anything from him. Somewhere no one knew his history. Somewhere, perhaps, the past might finally loosen its grip. Outside, a loose sheet of metal rattled against the barn. Ranger remained near the doorway, still watching, still listening. Far beneath the dry soil of the forgotten farm, something rested in darkness. It hadn't simply been abandoned. It had been sealed away, for a reason. No one in town knew what lay beneath that ground. Not the men laughing at the gate. Not the neighbors who warned Caleb away. Not even Caleb himself. But the land was not empty. It hadn't been empty for a very long time. That night, the temperature dropped quickly. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving a deep blue sky above the valley. Cold wind slipped through every crack in the farmhouse walls. Caleb sat on the floor with his back against the wall. A small lantern cast a weak pool of yellow light around him. Ranger lay nearby, his head resting on his paws. His eyes were half closed, but Ranger never seemed completely asleep. Caleb tried to rest. The moment his eyes closed, the darkness came alive. Helicopter rotors, sand striking his face, a voice screaming through radio static. Then, the blast. Caleb jerked awake. His breath came hard and fast. His chest tightened. For several seconds he had no idea where he was. His hand reached instinctively towards something that wasn't there anymore. A weapon. A mission. An order. Instead, his fingers touched cold floorboards. Caleb dragged one hand across his face. "You're not there anymore," he whispered. "You made it back." But back had never felt like a place. Ranger lifted his head. The dog heard the change in Caleb's breathing before Caleb himself understood it. Ranger rose, crossed the room, and pressed his body gently against Caleb's side. No whining, no pawing, no demands. He was simply there. Caleb buried his fingers in the thick fur around Ranger's neck. His grip tightened for a moment, then loosened. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know." Ranger stayed until Caleb's breathing slowed. It wasn't their first night like that. It wouldn't be their last. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Caleb had barely slept, but Ranger was already waiting by the door. They walked the property together. The mountains rose in the distance, their highest peaks still holding patches of snow. Along the fence line, posts had split, wire had rusted through, weeds had swallowed parts of the boundary. Caleb inspected everything silently. Years of military training had taught him to remember details without writing them down. Ranger moved ahead through waist-high patches of brittle grass. Then he stopped. Caleb noticed immediately. The dog's posture had changed. His ears sharpened forward. His tail lowered. Not fear. Focus. "What is it?" Ranger stared toward the old barn. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing appeared unusual. Just warped timber, collapsed roofing, scattered debris, and uneven dirt. Probably a rabbit. Ranger didn't move. Caleb considered investigating, but a gust of cold wind crossed the open field, and old instincts tightened his chest. "Toe open," too exposed. Memories had a way of turning harmless places into dangerous ones. Come on. Ranger obeyed reluctantly, but as they walked away, he looked back. By midday, Caleb had begun repairing the porch. The work was frustrating. Wood split when he hammered it, nails bent. Every repair revealed two more problems underneath. But work helped. Measure, could, secure, repeat. It gave his mind something solid to hold on to. Late that afternoon, another pickup came down the road. Caleb noticed it before he heard the engine. The truck stopped outside the gate. A man in his mid-50s climbed out, tall, broad-shouldered, heavy jacket. He leaned against the door with the relaxed posture of someone who wanted to appear harmless. Thought I'd come see the place for myself. Caleb rested his hammer on the porch railing. The man smiled. Travis Boone. Got land over that ridge. Caleb. Travis let his gaze travel slowly over the property. Hell of a place you bought. It'll do. Travis chuckled. You know why they practically gave it away? $5. 5, Travis repeated. Still too much. He kicked at the dirt. People don't stay here long. Caleb watched him more carefully now. Why? Travis glanced toward the barn. Bad ground. Nothing grows. Nothing lasts. He paused. Then, more quietly, he added, sometimes things get left behind. Caleb said nothing. Travis pushed away from the truck. Anyway, just welcoming you to the neighborhood. There was no warmth in the words. He climbed back inside and drove away. Caleb watched the dust settle behind him. Then he turned. Ranger was staring at the barn again. This time, Caleb stared with him. The next several days found their own rhythm. Wake before sunrise. Move before the memories caught up. Repair what could be repaired. Ignore what couldn't. Caleb patched sections of roof, reinforced the porch, cleared debris, and salvaged whatever materials the property still offered. The work was slow. Sometimes he would repair one board only to have another crack beside it. Still, he kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking could become dangerous. One afternoon, Caleb was halfway up a ladder when a sudden gust struck the house. The ladder shook. For half a second, Caleb wasn't in Wyoming anymore. The wind became rotor wash. Gray clouds became a sky filled with dust and spinning blades. A voice shouted somewhere behind him. Move. Move. Caleb froze. His knuckles whitened around the hammer. Below him, Ranger barked once. Sharp. Commanding. The sound brought Caleb back. The wind was wind again. The mountain stood in the distance. The farmhouse was beneath him. Old. Broken. Real. Caleb slowly climbed down. The moment his boots touched the ground, Ranger moved against his leg. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's head. I'm good. Ranger stared at him. Caleb almost smiled. All right. I'm still here. That seemed closer to the truth. By the end of the first week, the farm didn't look restored, but it looked less abandoned. The porch could carry weight again. The front door closed. One room inside had been cleared and repaired enough that Caleb no longer feared waking up beneath the floor. It wasn't much, but it was his. Most evenings, Caleb sat on the porch and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. Gold became orange. Orange became deep red. Then darkness. Ranger always stayed beside him. The townspeople never stopped watching. Trucks slowed when passing. Drivers looked a little too long. Caleb ignored them. Until Travis returned. This time, he drove through the gate. Caleb was repairing the fence when the truck crossed the property. Ranger heard it first. Travis stepped out with both hands inside his jacket pockets. You've been busy, trying to keep the place standing. That's going to take more than a hammer and hope. Travis glanced at Ranger. Sharp dog, military. Caleb nodded. Same as me. Figure. Travis wandered several steps toward the barn. Then he stopped near a patch of uneven ground. His eyes dropped briefly. You planning on staying? Planning on it. Most don't. Why's that? Travis looked around. Land like this has a way of pushing people out. Ranger produced a low growl. Travis heard it. His faint smile never reached his eyes. Anyway, just thought I'd check in. He turned toward the truck, then stopped. Some things on this land, he said without looking back, are better left buried. Then he drove away. That night, the wind screamed through the farmhouse walls. Ranger didn't lie down. He stood near the doorway, staring toward the barn. Eventually, Caleb sat up. "You hear something?" Ranger's ears twitched. Caleb listened. Wind. Old boards. Then, something else. A faint sound from the distance. Almost like something shifting underground. "Old buildings settling," Caleb muttered. But Ranger didn't relax. Neither did Caleb. He put on his jacket. Outside, clouds raced across the moon. Ranger led him toward the barn with calm certainty. A few yards from it, Caleb stopped. The earth beneath his boots felt wrong. Not dramatically. Just subtly softer, almost hollow. Ranger lowered his nose to the soil, then whined. Caleb studied the cracked dirt. "Tomorrow." Ranger remained fixed on the spot. "Tomorrow," Caleb repeated. Morning arrived with frost covering the field. Caleb stood on the porch holding a cup of black coffee. Ranger was already waiting near the barn. "You're not letting this go, are you?" The dog stared back. Caleb sighed. "All right, let's see what you've got." Ranger moved immediately. Near the barn, Caleb noticed what he had missed before. A shallow depression in the earth. Barely visible, but unnatural. Ranger circled it slowly, nose down, then stopped, and began digging. Not playfully. Not like a dog chasing a mouse. This was urgent. Focused. "What have you got?" Dry soil flew behind Ranger's paws. Then Caleb heard something strange. Each scrape seemed to echo. He crouched and brushed the loose dirt aside. The surface beneath wasn't rock. It was too flat. "Hold on." Ranger backed away. Caleb retrieved a shovel. The blade struck something almost immediately. Clang. Metall. Caleb froze. He scraped again. Another hollow metallic sound. He dropped to his knees and cleared the remaining dirt with his hands. A dark, smooth surface appeared beneath the soil. Steel. Old steel. But intact. No way. Ranger approached cautiously and sniffed it, then pulled back. Caleb felt cold air rising faintly through the earth. Not wind, something from below. For nearly an hour, he dug around the edges. Eventually, the shape revealed itself. A rectangular steel hatch. Heavy, reinforced, buried deliberately. A thick handle sat near the center. The hinges were built to last. This wasn't farm equipment. This wasn't an ordinary cellar. Someone had built this to remain closed. Caleb's old instincts returned. Unknown structure. No markings. No context. Be careful. He looked at Ranger. Not yet. Caleb covered the hatch with a plank and loose dirt, then rested one hand against Ranger's back. "You found it." Ranger leaned against him, but his eyes remained on the ground. That evening, the farmhouse felt different. Every creak sounded louder now. Every gust against the windows seemed to carry a question. Caleb sat on the edge of his makeshift bed. Old bunker? Storm shelter? Storage vault? None of those explanations satisfied him, because there were no markings, no labels, nothing explaining who had built it, or why. Caleb looked toward Ranger. "You think it's nothing?" Ranger stared back. Caleb gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah, me neither." He didn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, Caleb finally sat up. No point pretending it isn't there. Ranger was on his feet instantly. Moonlight painted the property in silver. They crossed the field. Caleb uncovered the steel again. "Let's see what you are." He dug until the entire hatch was visible, then wrapped both hands around the handle. Everything inside him warned caution. Unknown enclosed space. No backup. No idea what waited below. "Stay close." Caleb pulled. Nothing. He planted his boots and tried again. Metal groaned. The seal shifted. One final pull broke it loose. A deep crack split the night. Cold, stale air escaped from underground. Ranger stepped backward. A low rumble formed in his chest. "Yeah," Caleb whispered. "I feel it too." The hatch opened. Below it was complete darkness. Caleb switched on his flashlight. A steel ladder descended vertically between concrete walls. The beam disappeared before reaching the bottom. Caleb placed one foot on the first rung, then another. Slowly, he descended. Ranger remained above, staring into the opening. Halfway down, Caleb felt the ladder shift. A rung had partially corroded. He changed his footing. Then Ranger barked sharply overhead. Caleb looked up. His boot slipped. For one violent second, his body swung away from the ladder. His hand snapped around the rail. He held on. Easy. Ranger paced above him, whining. Caleb regained his footing. This time, he tested every rung before trusting it. Eventually, his boots touched concrete. He turned his flashlight. A small underground room emerged from the darkness. Concrete walls. Concrete floor. No markings. But it wasn't empty. 6 steel boxes were stacked neatly against the far wall. Caleb didn't approach them immediately. Training took over. Scan first. Move second. Listen. Nothing. The room was perhaps 10 or 12 feet across. The concrete remained remarkably sound. Whoever constructed it had intended the chamber to survive. Caleb moved toward the boxes. Each had reinforced corners and a heavy lock. No names. No numbers. No labels. The first latch resisted. Caleb pulled harder. Rust cracked. The lock gave. He raised the lid. For several seconds, his brain refused to understand what the flashlight was showing him. Stacks of paper. Bundles. Carefully wrapped. Caleb lifted one. Cash. $100 bills. Preserved. Layer beneath layer. No. He opened a second box. The flashlight reflected sharply back at him. Gold. Guans. Dozens. Then hundreds. Other containers held bonds, certificates, financial records, and more currency sealed against moisture. Nothing looked hurried. Everything had been catalogued, stored, protected, planned. Caleb sat slowly on the cold floor. He didn't count every bundle. He didn't need to. His estimate formed almost unwillingly. 50 million. Maybe more. The figure was absurd. And that was precisely what frightened him. Money like this didn't simply disappear beneath an abandoned farm. Above him, Ranger barked. Oms. Then again. Urgent. Caleb immediately stood. What is it? Ranger's growl answered from above. Caleb reached the ladder. He climbed carefully, testing every rung. When he emerged, Ranger wasn't looking at him. The dog was staring toward the road. Beyond the ridge, a trail of dust was rising. A vehicle. Coming toward them. Caleb looked from the road to the hatch. Then back again. They weren't supposed to find this, he whispered. Ranger growled. And Caleb understood. The treasure wasn't truly lost. Someone had hidden it. There was a difference. He closed the hatch quickly, shoveled dirt across it, dragged a weathered plank over the disturbed soil, and scattered debris around the area. Then Caleb returned to the porch. By the time the truck arrived, he looked as though nothing had happened. Ranger lay beside him. Still, but ready. It was Travis. 2 other men sat inside his truck. Caleb noticed them immediately. Travis stepped out. Morning. Something like that. Travis's eyes moved toward the barn. Then the disturbed earth. Then Caleb. You been digging? Fixing fence posts. Yeah? Ranger growled quietly. Travis glanced at him. That dog's got good instincts. He does. Travis took one step closer. Funny thing about land like this, everybody thinks it's worthless, empty. Caleb said nothing. But it isn't always empty. The 2 men stared at each other. Then Travis shrugged. Anyway, just checking in. He turned back toward his truck. If you ever find something out here, let me know. I'll keep that in mind. Caleb watched until the truck disappeared behind the ridge. Then he rested a hand on Ranger. They know something. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was a conclusion. $50 million sat beneath his property, unreported, unprotected, and very likely connected to people who hadn't forgotten it. That evening, Caleb sat on the porch. You found it, he said to Ranger. The dog leaned against his leg. Caleb stared toward the barn. Money like that doesn't get buried and forgotten. The cold seemed to sink deeper. This wasn't an accident. Finding the bunker had only been the beginning. That night, Caleb placed a small metal document case on the kitchen table. Before resealing the bunker, he had brought up one container, not cash, not gold. Paperwork. Something about the documents had disturbed him more than the money. He opened the case. Financial records. Transfers. Account numbers. Corporate names. Some were decades old. Others were surprisingly recent. Caleb read until a pattern began to emerge. This wasn't somebody's savings. Money had moved across state lines, across countries, through companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Then Caleb found a name. Boone. He read it twice. Then a third time. Different dates. Different transactions. The same family name. That's not a coincidence. Ranger rose and moved beside him. Caleb began connecting everything. The bunker. The money. Travis's obsession with the property. His warning about things being better left buried. This place wasn't abandoned, Caleb whispered. It was forgotten on purpose. The next morning, Caleb drove into town. He parked outside a small building with a weathered sign. Law Offices of Daniel Price. Inside, a receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "I need Daniel Price." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." Several minutes later, Caleb sat across from a lawyer in his early 60s. Daniel Price had silvering hair, glasses resting low on his nose, and the patient expression of a man accustomed to hearing strange stories before deciding whether he believed them. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hayes?" Caleb leaned forward. "I bought that old farm outside town. For $5, I've heard. There's something underneath it." Price's expression became more attentive. "What kind of something?" "Something that may belong to me legally, but probably shouldn't." "Start from the beginning." Caleb told him about Ranger, the hatch, the bunker, the money, the documents, and the name Boone. Price didn't interrupt. When Caleb finished, the lawyer remained silent for several seconds. "If this is accurate," Price finally said, "we aren't dealing with a simple property dispute. I figured you need to be extremely careful." Caleb's expression didn't change. "I've been careful most of my life." "Then you already understand why I'm telling you this. Money like that doesn't remain hidden for decades without a reason." "I know." Price folded his hands. "We do this properly, quietly. It may take time. I'm not in a hurry." "Good." The lawyer hesitated. "Because if somebody else knows what's there." He didn't finish. "He didn't need to. So we move quietly," Caleb said. Price nodded. Very quietly. When Caleb returned to the farm that evening, Ranger jumped from the truck first and scanned the field. Everything appeared unchanged. House, barn, fence, mountains. But Caleb no longer saw a worthless farm. He saw a place carrying a past that had failed to remain buried. Night arrived. Ranger stood on the porch, staring toward the road. Caleb heard the engine before the lights appeared. Low, controlled, approaching. Ranger growled. "They're not even hiding it this time." The truck came over the ridge with its headlights off. Only then did the beam switch on. It drove straight through the gate. 3 men climbed out, Travis Boone, and the 2 men from earlier. Up close. The strangers looked harder. Their movements were measured, purposeful. Caleb stepped off the porch. Ranger positioned himself slightly ahead. "Evening," Travis said. Caleb didn't answer. Travis stopped outside the porch light. "Long day?" "What do you want, Travis?" The use of his name changed the atmosphere. Travis smiled faintly. "Good. Let's skip the small talk." He paused. "You found something." It wasn't a question. Ranger's growl deepened. "You've been doing more than fixing fences," Travis continued. "You've been watching me." Small town. The 2 men behind Travis moved slightly apart. Caleb noticed immediately. A widening angle. An attempt to surround space without appearing to do so. Old instincts awakened. "Whatever you think I found," Caleb said, "you're wrong. Don't do that. You're too smart." Travis stepped closer. "Let's make this simple. You hand it over, and everybody walks away." "Hand what over?" Ranger moved forward 1 step. Travis's expression tightened. "You don't want to play this game. Then don't start it." One of the other men spoke. "We know what's out here." Caleb turned toward him. "Do you?" The man hesitated. "Enough." Travis raised a hand, silencing him, then looked back at Caleb. "Last chance." Caleb didn't move. "Nothing on this property belongs to you." The man on the left suddenly advanced. Ranger reacted before anyone else. The German shepherd lunged between the stranger and Caleb, barking with such force that the man stopped instantly. Ranger's body stayed low, teeth visible, every muscle tense. A warning. Nothing more, but nothing less. Caleb placed one hand on Ranger's back. "Stay." Ranger held his position. Travis exhaled. "Not how I wanted this to go." "Then you should have stayed off my land." For several seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Travis stepped backward. "For now." He gestured to the others. They returned to the truck. The doors slammed. The vehicle disappeared into the darkness. Caleb remained where he was until the engine could no longer be heard. That wasn't over. Ranger looked at him. They'll come back. Caleb stared toward the barn. They think it's theirs. The wind moved across the field. Caleb's eyes hardened. But they're wrong. For the first time since arriving at the farm, Caleb wasn't merely trying to survive. He was preparing to stand his ground. The next morning, he secured the doors, checked the windows, cleared sight lines between the porch and the road. It wasn't panic. It was preparation. Ranger shadowed every movement. By midday, Caleb stood near the buried hatch. He hadn't reopened it. What mattered now wasn't the money. It was the evidence. Names, companies, transactions, a network larger than Travis Boone. The phone rang that afternoon. Hayes, it's Daniel Price. Something in the lawyer's voice had changed. I ran preliminary checks on those names. And you were right to be concerned. Caleb's fingers tightened around the phone. The accounts connect to shell corporations, offshore structures, layered ownership. Whoever built that network worked very hard not to be found. And Boone? Connected. Not directly, but close enough to raise serious questions. Caleb looked toward the barn. There's more, Price said. Several of those entities disappeared years ago. Suddenly, no explanation. Caleb was silent. If the material on your farm connects to them, this isn't a local matter anymore. I'm not surprised. You should consider stepping away. Let authorities handle it. Caleb stared through the window. They won't get here before Boone does. Price didn't argue. I'll start making calls, but stay safe. Caleb gave a quiet laugh. Safe hasn't really been part of the plan for a long time. After the call, Caleb remained at the table. Ranger came over and rested his head against Caleb's leg. Caleb placed one hand on him. This is bigger than we thought. He looked at the documents. For years, Caleb's instinct had been to leave trouble behind whenever possible. Move. Survive. Keep going. But something inside him had changed. He could leave this place, abandon the farm, turn over the evidence, and disappear. Or he could finally stop running. Caleb looked at Ranger. I'm done running. Ranger lifted his head. That evening, Caleb stood on the porch while the sun burned orange above the mountains. Ranger sat beside him. You stayed, Caleb said. Ranger's ears twitched. You always do. Caleb looked toward the field. They think this is about money. Wind bent the dry grass in slow waves. But it isn't. His voice became quieter. It's about what they tried to hide. Several days passed. No Travis. No unfamiliar trucks. No visitors. Caleb didn't mistake silence for safety. He used the time. The roof improved. The barn gained new supports. He restored part of the water system and pieced together enough electrical work to make the farmhouse livable. Every repair gave the day structure, and structure helped keep the memories away. But some nights, the past still returned. A dropped tool became gunfire. Wind became rotor wash. Dark rooms became places half a world away. One night, Caleb woke suddenly. For several seconds, he didn't know where he was. His hand reached toward a weapon that hadn't been beside him in years. His chest tightened. The room felt too small. Then something warm pressed against his side. Ranger. No barking. No sudden movement. Just steady weight. Something real. Caleb's breathing slowed. The darkness became a farmhouse again. The walls became walls. Caleb placed a hand on Ranger's neck. I'm here. Ranger stayed. He always did. The next morning, sunlight spread across the farm in a wash of gold. Caleb sat on the porch drinking coffee. Ranger rested at his feet. They were right about one thing, Caleb said. Ranger raised one ear. This place needed work. A faint smile touched Caleb's face. But they were wrong about everything else. That afternoon, another vehicle approached. Caleb and Ranger both noticed immediately. But this truck stopped at the gate. A clean-cut older man stepped out slowly. His hands remained visible. Careful. Respectful. Mr. Hayes? Caleb stayed where he was. That's me. I'm Robert Ellis, federal investigator. Caleb's face showed nothing. Mind if we talk? You can talk from there. Ellis nodded. Fair enough. He remained several yards away. We've been investigating certain financial networks for years. Offshore accounts, missing assets, shell companies. People who disappear when investigations get close. And you think it's here? We know something was hidden on this property. We didn't know whether it still existed. Caleb glanced briefly toward the barn. Ellis continued. You've already done the hard part. You found it. And now? Now we make sure it doesn't disappear again. Caleb studied the man. No threat in the words. No demand. Just responsibility. You're late, Caleb said. Ellis gave the faintest smile. We usually are. Caleb stepped forward. Nothing leaves this property without me knowing. That's fair. And nobody gets hurt. That's the goal. For the first time since opening the bunker, Caleb felt some of its weight move away from his shoulders. The secret was no longer his alone. Weeks passed. Investigators arrived quietly. The bunker was opened again, this time with cameras, evidence bags, records, and witnesses. Everything was documented. The money, the gold, the bonds, the financial ledgers. For the first time in decades, whatever someone had tried to bury beneath that farm was brought into the light. Travis Boone never returned. Word moved through town in the peculiar way. Truth travels through small communities. Not through announcements. Not through headlines. Through glances, half-finished conversations, and sudden changes in how people treated Caleb Hayes. The laughter stopped. So did the jokes. People who once slowed their trucks to stare now gave him distance. Some offered a wave. Others looked away, perhaps remembering what they had said when he first arrived. Caleb paid little attention. He had never bought the farm for them. The first snow arrived early. It fell overnight, soft and silent, covering the battered land beneath a clean sheet of white. Caleb stepped onto the porch the next morning. Ranger followed, leaving paw prints across the fresh snow. Caleb stopped and listened. The silence was different now. Not heavy, not threatening, not waiting for something. Just quiet. Real quiet. The farmhouse had changed. It held warmth now. Clean water moved through repaired pipes. Lights glowed behind windows that no longer rattled in every gust of wind. The barn stood straighter. The fences stretched farther each week. The farm still wasn't perfect. But Caleb hadn't come looking for perfect. He had come looking for somewhere to begin again. One afternoon, he and Ranger stood at the edge of the field. Snow had melted in patches, exposing dark soil beneath. You remember our first day here? Caleb asked. Ranger's ears flicked. Everyone thought we were crazy. Caleb considered that. Maybe we were. Ranger sniffed the cold air. Caleb smiled. But we stayed. He rested a hand on the dog's neck. And that made all the difference. Later, Caleb returned to the porch. The sun lowered behind the mountains, painting the sky gold, before fading slowly into blue. Ranger lay at his feet. Caleb looked across land that had once been treated like nothing more than a symbol of failure. $5. A collapsing house. A dying barn. Worthless soil. That was what everyone else had seen. But the greatest value of the farm had never been the fortune buried beneath it. The money would become evidence. The gold would be cataloged. The documents would move through investigations and courtrooms. Those things were temporary. What remained above the ground mattered more. A house repaired board by board. A man rebuilding himself day by day. A dog who never walked away. They thought this place was empty, Caleb said softly. Ranger lifted his head. Caleb watched the last sunlight disappear. But it was waiting. He reached down and placed his hand against Ranger's neck. And maybe we were too. The dog leaned into his touch. Darkness settled across the farm. But it no longer felt like something closing around Caleb. It felt like rest. Stars emerged above the mountains. For the first time in years, Caleb understood what he had actually found. It wasn't $50 million. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a bunker beneath the earth. It was something far less spectacular and far more valuable. A second chance. A reason to stay. And a loyal companion who had never once decided Caleb was too broken to follow. Caleb closed his eyes, cold air against his face. Ranger beside him, a warm light behind him, a future in front of him. When Caleb opened his eyes again, everything was still there. Still real. Still his. And this time, it was enough. If this story meant something to you, if you felt even a small part of Caleb's journey, leave a 1-inch the comments. No long explanation is needed. Just one. It lets me know you were here, that you felt the story, and that you stayed until the end. And if you believe loyalty still matters, if you believe a dog can become more than a companion and more than family, leave it too. And if you'd like to hear more emotional stories about veterans, loyal dogs, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the next story finds the part of us we thought had already been buried. And I'll see you there.